The rain was drumming a relentless, rhythmic beat against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown penthouse. It was 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was sitting at the kitchen island, a lukewarm cup of chamomile tea cradled between my hands, staring at a spread of financial balance sheets. My phone buzzed on the marble countertop. The screen lit up with a message from my husband of 7 years, David. We hadn't been sleeping in the same room for 6 months. Our marriage had become a quiet, echoing house built on cold glances and polite evasion. Yet, nothing could have prepared me for the text that appeared on the screen. Greater than, I can't do this anymore, Clara. I'm leaving you. By the time you read this, I'll be boarding a flight out of the country. I ran away with your best friend, Sarah. She understands me in ways you never could. Don't bother calling or looking for us. We're starting over. Asterisk. Greater than. I stared at the words. I read them once. I read them twice. I waited for the familiar sting of tears, the constriction in my chest, the sudden urge to scream or smash the mug in my hands. But as the seconds ticked by, all I felt was a strange, hollow sensation. It was like watching a poorly written soap opera. Sarah, my best friend since college. The woman I had loaned thousands of dollars to when her boutique business went under. The woman who sat at my Thanksgiving table every year, drinking my wine and complimenting my home. And David, the man who had spent the last 3 years treating me like an inconvenient roommate while quietly draining his own emotional availability to zero. I unlocked my phone, tapped the text box, and typed a 2-word reply. Greater than, good luck. Greater than. I pressed send, locked the screen, and placed the phone face down. Then, I took a slow sip of my tea. They thought they had broken me. They thought they were escaping a tyrant to build a kingdom of their own. What David and Sarah didn't know was that they hadn't escaped a trap, they had walked right into one. To understand why I wasn't crying, you have to understand the truth about our lives. David married me when we were both 25. Back then, I was a young woman who believed in fairy tales. My father had passed away a year prior, leaving me a massive, multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio and a strict, ironclad trust fund managed by a highly sophisticated legal team. David was a charming, mid-level marketing executive who swept me off my feet during my period of grief. Within 2 years of our marriage, David convinced me to appoint him as a junior partner in the management of the secondary holding companies. He wanted to feel like the man of the house. He wanted ambition. I, blindly in love, allowed it. But greed is a slow-growing cancer. About 14 months ago, I noticed discrepancies in our joint business accounts. Huge sums of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, were being moved through shell companies. I didn't confront him immediately. Instead, I hired a private forensic accountant and a top-tier private investigator. What they uncovered was a double betrayal that was almost artistic in its cruelty. David wasn't just stealing from the business, he was funneling the money directly into accounts registered under Sarah's name. The investigators' files were filled with photos of them, holding hands in cafes 3 cities away, entering boutique hotels while I was away on corporate conferences, laughing in the back of luxury cars. They had been planning this grand escape for a year. David's plan was simple. Drain the secondary corporate accounts to a level that wouldn't immediately trigger a criminal alarm, transfer the assets to an offshore bank in Panama, and run away with Sarah to live like royalty. But David was a marketer, not a financial mastermind. He didn't realize that the secondary accounts he was draining weren't tied to my personal wealth. They were operational accounts tied to a commercial credit line, guaranteed personally by him and his own family's small estate as collateral when he signed the partnership agreements years ago. By running away tonight and taking that money, David hadn't stolen my fortune. He had legally defaulted on a multi-million-dollar corporate debt that was entirely in his name. Part 3. The morning after. The next morning, the sun broke through the storm clouds, painting the city in shades of gold. I dressed with deliberate care, a tailored white pantsuit, gold minimalist jewelry, and a sleek, dark trench coat. I looked like a woman who owned the world, because, on paper, I practically did. My first stop was the corporate headquarters of Vance & Associates, my legal firm. Arthur Vance, a gray-haired gentleman who had looked after my family's legal affairs for 30 years, was already waiting for me in the conference room. A thick, manila folder sat on the mahogany table between us. He actually did it, Clara, Arthur said, his voice a mix of disbelief and professional satisfaction. The wire transfers were finalized at 11:15 p.m. last night. Exactly 30 minutes before he sent you that text message. How much did he take, Arthur? I asked, setting my designer handbag on the chair beside me. $4.2 million, Arthur replied, opening the folder. He transferred it through 3 separate accounts before routing it to the Panamanian shell company. He thinks he's incredibly clever. He doesn't realize that because those specific accounts were flagged under our audit order last month, the bank kept a digital mirror trail of every transaction. I leaned back, a faint smile touching my lips. And the legal ramifications, Arthur smiled, though there was no warmth in it. Because he bypassed the dual signature requirement using a forged authorization code, which we have documented proof of. This is no longer a civil dispute. This is grand larceny, bank fraud, and interstate embezzlement. Furthermore, because he used his personal shares and his parents' countryside property as the collateral backing for that specific credit line, the bank is already initiating foreclosure procedures on his family home. A momentary pang of sympathy hit me for David's parents. They were quiet, working-class people who lived in a beautiful, modest farmhouse in upstate New York. But then I remembered how David's mother had looked at me during Christmas dinner, condescendingly telling me that I should work less and cook more for her precious son. They had raised a thief. They could share the consequences. File the papers, Arthur, I said quietly. Initiate the divorce on the grounds of criminal asset desertion. Trigger the fraud alerts with the authorities. Let's let the machinery work. Meanwhile, 7,000 miles away, in a luxury resort overlooking the turquoise waters of the Pacific Ocean in Panama, David and Sarah believed they had won the lottery. Thanks to my investigator, I didn't need to guess what they were doing. I received regular, encrypted updates. For the first 3 weeks, they lived like kings. They rented a penthouse suite that cost $3,000 a night. Sarah spent her days shopping at high-end boutiques, buying designer bags, silk dresses, and diamond earrings with the platinum cards David had secured. David bought a luxury speedboat, spending his afternoons drinking expensive champagne and bragging to local expats about his brilliant financial exit. They thought I was back in the city, broken-hearted, crying myself to sleep, and hiding from the shame of being abandoned by both my husband and my closest confidant. On the 4th week, the first crack in their paradise appeared. David sat at a beachside restaurant, trying to pay for a $10,000 dinner and drinks party he had hosted for some newly made acquaintances. He handed the waiter his primary platinum card. 5 minutes later, the waiter returned, his expression politely strained. I'm sorry, Senor Davis. The card has been declined. Asterisk. David chuckled, waving his hand dismissively. Try it again. There's millions in that account. It's a bank error. Asterisk. The waiter tried it again. Same result. David, growing flustered and embarrassed in front of his wealthy guests, pulled out 3 other cards. Every single one of them was declined. What David didn't know was that the International Financial Task Force, acting on the bank fraud warrants filed by Arthur Vance, had frozen every single account tied to his name, his social security number, and his known passport details. The offshore account in Panama was temporarily locked under an international Mareva injunction, an asset freezing order that blocks suspects from touching stolen funds during an active criminal investigation. David had to use the last of his physical cash, a few $100s he had in his pocket, to pay a fraction of the bill, leaving his watch as collateral with the angry restaurant manager. The paradise turned into a pressure cooker within 48 hours. Sarah, accustomed to the endless flow of luxury, panicked when she realized they couldn't access the millions. The luxury resort kicked them out of the penthouse suite when the hotel's automated billing system flagged their frozen corporate credit cards. They were forced to move into a cheap, humid motel 3 miles away from the beach, where the air conditioner rattled constantly and the walls were peeling. What do you mean the money is frozen? Sarah screamed at David, throwing her newly bought designer shoes across the small motel room. You told me you had this completely figured out. You said Clara was too stupid to notice the transfers. David was sweating, his hair unkempt, his tailored suit wrinkled and stained. He was staring at his laptop screen, looking at the red, bold text across his banking portal, account accessibility restricted, contact legal department. She didn't notice. David yelled back, his voice cracking with desperation. I used the forged codes. There's no way she could have blocked this unless she knew before we even left. The realization hit David like a physical blow. The quiet dinners, the soft smiles I gave him when he said he was working late, the calm way I had accepted his coldness, it wasn't ignorance. It was execution. Just then, David's phone rang. It was an international number. He answered it instantly, hoping it was his banker. David, it wasn't his banker. It was his mother, sobbing uncontrollably. Mom, what's wrong? David asked, his stomach dropping. David, what have you done? His mother wailed through the receiver. The bank, men in suits came to the house today. They have legal papers. They are foreclosing on the farm, David. They said you used this house as collateral for a multimillion-dollar fraud scheme. Your father is in the hospital with chest pains. Where are you? Why aren't you answering your calls? David's phone slipped from his hand, crashing onto the dirty tiled floor of the motel room. Sarah looked at him, her eyes wide with cold, calculating venom. The romance and deep understanding she had shared with David was entirely built on the foundation of a $4 million fortune. Now that the fortune was gone, the foundation had crumbled into dust. I'm leaving, Sarah whispered, pulling her suitcase out from under the bed. I'm not going to jail for you, David. This was your plan. Leaving, David yelled, grabbing her arm. We did this together. You spent half the money. Your boutique debts were paid off using those accounts. Get your hands off me. Sarah shrieked, slapping his hand away. You told me it was clean. You're a failure, David. You were a failure when you were with Clara, and you're a failure now. 6 weeks after the night of the text message, I flew to Panama. Not to chase them, and certainly not to beg for David back. I flew there because the international legal deposition required my presence to verify the asset recovery documents. I sat in the glass-walled conference room of the highest court building in Panama City. My lawyers were on my right, and the local authorities were on my left. The heavy wooden doors opened, and David and Sarah were brought in by airport customs security. They had been detained trying to board a budget flight to Colombia using fake documentation. They looked unrecognizable. Sarah's hair was matted, her face pale and drawn, stripped of the glamour she so highly prized. David looked broken, his posture defeated, his eyes hollow and dark. When David saw me sitting at the head of the table, looking pristine and completely untouched by their betrayal, a look of profound, desperate regret washed over his face. He broke away from the guard and rushed toward the table. Clara, please, David begged, falling to his knees before the table. Please, you have to drop the fraud charges. They're going to take my parents' house. I'll give everything back, every single cent. I made a mistake, Clara. Sarah seduced me, she tricked me into thinking you didn't love me. David, shut up, Sarah yelled from behind him, her voice filled with pure hatred. You were the one who wanted her money. I looked down at my former husband, then at the woman who used to call herself my sister. I felt no anger. I felt no malice. I only felt a deep, overwhelming sense of peace. David, I spoke, my voice calm, steady, and terrifyingly clear. Do you remember the text you sent me before you left? David swallowed hard, nodding weakly. You told me that leaving me was the only way you could grow, I continued, leaning forward slightly. You told me Sarah understood you in ways I never could. I stood up, smoothing the front of my white jacket. I looked at the legal documents on the table, then looked back into David's desperate eyes. It turns out you were right. She does understand you. You are both thieves, and you both deserve each other. I picked up my handbag, turning away from them. Clara, wait, please, David screamed as the security guards grabbed his arms, pulling him back. You replied, good luck. What did you mean by that? I paused at the doorway, looking back over my shoulder one last time. I meant exactly what I said, David. When you run away into a burning building, you need all the luck you can get. The divorce was finalized 2 months later. Because of the overwhelming evidence of criminal fraud, the court stripped David of every single marital right, asset, and claim to my estate. He was sentenced to 5 years in a federal correctional facility for bank fraud and corporate embezzlement. Sarah was ordered to pay full restitution. Her assets were liquidated, and she was forced into public bankruptcy, her social reputation completely annihilated. David's parents' farm was saved, not by David, but by me. I quietly bought the mortgage from the bank and transferred the deed to his parents' names under a lifetime tenancy agreement. They had no idea I did it, and I didn't care if they ever found out. I didn't do it for praise, I did it because I could. Now, I was standing on the terrace of my penthouse, looking out over the glittering skyline of the city. The rain had stopped, and the night sky was clear, filled with 1,000 brilliant stars. My phone buzzed on the patio table. It was a message from Arthur Vance. Greater than, all assets fully recovered and restored to your primary trust. The past is officially closed, Clara. Congratulations. Asterisk. Greater than. I looked at the message, smiled, and deleted it. I took a deep breath of the crisp night air, feeling the immense weight of the past years completely lift from my shoulders. I was no longer the girl who trusted blindly. I was a woman who knew her worth, who protected her kingdom, and who knew exactly when to say goodbye. I raised my glass to the beautiful, wide-open horizon ahead of me. The future was mine, and it looked magnificent.